One of the final questions that I have for you is, what about charter city, or how we know it in Honduras, ciudades modelo? In terms of governance, what do you think about this? What are the difference, or is Próspera ciudad modelo?
Let me first say that I don't think that there is an agreed upon definition even of what that is, right? I mean, I think that when people hear Ciudad Modelo, they have a concept of what it is, which is not generally agreed upon. Okay, I think that what is generally meant is like a company town, right? That is imposed upon people and where people have no say. I think that's what they mean by it, right? And that moreover, it's kind of like a country within a country where no Honduran laws apply, where human rights are not respected, and where the only thing that matters is kind of like the profit motive of the company that is quote unquote running the city. I think that's what people mean, or at least conceptualize, when they think of Ciudad Modelo. And I'm speaking mostly in the Honduran context, okay? I could be wrong about that, but since there's no like central definition, that's my best understanding based on the concerns that people legitimately have about ciudades modelo, how they are understood. And so within that framework of what is understood for a ciudad modelo, resoundingly, we're not a ciudad modelo. I mean, resoundingly, we're not a ciudad modelo. I said earlier that what we're seeking to do is create centers for prosperity, okay? And that the most basic approach for people to be prosperous is to have access to jobs that they love doing and get, paid for well. And so what we're looking to create ultimately is a jobs market, right? A bunch of jobs that need to be filled by Hondurans primarily. And as I said earlier, it so happens that like, it's not us, the way humans everywhere in the world, including Honduras, where there's the highest concentration of jobs are physical spaces that most people describe as cities. They don't have to be cities in like a New York style or how you have it in your background, Trey, Dubai. It's just like, it's a fairly urbanized space with higher density than its surroundings. But the reason is that that's how ideas flow. So is this eventually going to end up looking like a city in that regard? Again, not what Trey has in the background, but something more like, at least in the context of Roatan, a beautifully integrated with nature, more highly urbanized area so that the environmental impact is minimized. Then yes, I think over time, this will evolve to be something that most people identify as a city. What it's being done in La Ceiba will start off as something more than what people identify as a business park, right? With warehouses and factories and then housing around it. Whereas Roatan is more of a service hub, so they're going to be office spaces and what have you. But the modelo component of it, given the definition I think exists, could not be farther from what we're doing. And here's why in a number of dimensions. First of all, to the point of this is a country within a country and Honduran law is ignored or not followed. Absolutely not. The whole Zeder framework is Honduran law. The Honduran constitution must be respected. The Desde is a creation of the National Congress of Honduras. That's the definition of whether it's Honduran law. And then to the idea that because you're doing certain things differently within the physical boundaries of what is to be a Zede, that means that it's not Honduras. It's ridiculous. There's multiple departments in Honduras, and there are multiple municipalities in Honduras. And in Honduras, forget this, municipalities have a high degree of autonomy. And when you go from one municipality to the other, rules are different. Does it mean that they're not part of Honduras? Of course not. It just means that they're adopting a different legal condition. What you pay in Tegucigalpa versus San Pedro versus Roatan for building permits or car licenses is different, right? The way that they impose all sorts of standards is different. So different does not mean that you're not part of Honduras. Therefore, just because the Zedes have the ability to be different in some dimensions doesn't automatically mean that they're not Honduras. The degree to which they're different And the ways in which they're different, moreover, has only been possible because of the Honduran Constitution, the National Congress, and has had to be approved through the processes that the National Congress has established, which includes an oversight committee called CAMP, made up primarily of Hondurans, where foreigners are only effectively advisors. And so, no, there's no conceptual way in which you can think of a Zede as not Honduras, and assigning difference equaling not Honduras, it fails the reality test of everything that is already happening in Honduras, Zedes aside. I think it would be a mistake to say that just because Honduras, through a political subdivision, which is what a Zede is itself adopting a far better legal system, that it's now not Honduras. I mean, think about it. It's like saying, just because it's a lot better than what we have, then that automatically means it's not Honduras. How limited of a framework could that be? It basically says that in order for it to be Honduras, it has to be less advanced. What? Makes no sense. Anybody making that argument should wonder, what are you actually saying? That if it's that much better, then it cannot be Honduras? I profoundly reject that mental model. But as a matter of technical reality, it is very clearly part of Honduras, and it's very clearly part of the Honduras legal system. Okay, so that's one point, and I think it's probably the most important point. The other points probably revolve in the CIUDAD MODELO context of, is there, like, do residents have a say, right? Is this imposed upon people with stolen land? And the answer there, again, is absolutely not. First and foremost, what we are doing as Prospera, again, and I can only speak to what Prospera is doing, although some things will apply by law to all Zedes, okay? But this for sure applies to Prospera. What we're doing is we're starting on greenfield sites, and what that means is that they're empty and there are no residents, okay? There's no development on those sites. Therefore, by default, anybody that ends up in the Prospera developments have had to choose to be in the developments. They chose, right? Unless you are to see Zedes or Prospera kidnapping people and then by force putting them inside of the Zede, and that's never going to happen. Everybody that's inside of a Prospera hub is there by choice. It is there by choice. So from the beginning, they chose to be there. Now, the Zed is following all of the international best practices of transparency. It's publishing in its gazette. And moreover, which is very different than when you cross into another municipality. Let me give you an example. If you go to Tegucigalpa, automatically from San Pedro, you are required to follow the laws that the municipality of Tegucigalpa has decided. Just because you physically moved into that jurisdiction. You didn't sign a piece of paper that says, I hereby acknowledge the rules of the municipality of Tegucigalpa and accept that they are imposed upon me. No, it is a standard accepted principle, erroneously in my opinion, that just by physically being inside of that territory, you are now bound morally and legally by those rules, even though they are completely different in some regards than the rules of San Pedro. For the Zede, it could be said that if you choose to enter that separate legal jurisdiction, you are likewise accepting by default the fact that those different rules of that effectively municipality also apply to you. But the Zede regime requires a far higher standard of ensuring that you are concurring and agreeing to those standards. And this is probably the highest standard worldwide, which is in order to legally enter, you are required, and certainly if you have the intent of being a resident, you are required to sign, physically sign an agreement of coexistence, it's called on the law, un acuerdo de coexistencia, which spells out the key things that are unique, right, compared to, say, the municipality of Roatan or of Tegucigalpa or San Pedro, right? You basically have to proactively, not just show up physically, which is already enough, according to any standard in the world. You have to take a step further and you have to sign a contract that says, I understand and I consent to these rules and standards. Okay, so that's level 2. Not only are you physically choosing to be there, but if you're going to do this legally, you have to sign a contract that says you consent. Now, if you do that illegally, you're not only violating the Honduran law, you're also violating private property, because all of this is being done so far in private property. But as if that were not enough, okay, as if that were not enough, the third layer as to why it's not the case that what we're doing is an imposition is that residents have the ability to elect representatives as if they were in a municipality that sit on the decision-making body, the senior-most decision-making body within the special jurisdiction that is called a sede and operates very similar to a municipality. Okay. Now, it is unique and slightly different that if you were to equate a sede like a municipality, and the Constitution says they are very similar, in a municipality you have the municipal corporation with a board, right? The council, if you will, and those are all elected. In a sede, in the PRÓSPERA sede, okay, because this is in fact an innovation that PRÓSPERA brought to the table, which is not explicit in the law, and it is a huge upgrade in compliance with international treaties that indicate that a best practice of governance is to have representation of those that are being governed. Okay, so PRÓSPERA created in partnership with the Honduran government, and again following all the procedures for it to be legal, a requirement that is not just one individual that by the law is called the technical secretary, that there is a whole board, a municipal corporation equivalent council, the majority of which effectively get elected by the residents. So not only do residents have to physically take action to be inside, not only do they sign a contract, but then they get to elect representatives that sit on the decision-making body, which is called the sede council, the PRÓSPERA sede council, to continuously look out for their interests. So they entered, they agreed, and then they have standing representation. So for all those reasons, as if, I think it is a resounding misunderstanding or malicious intent to create an unreality that PRÓSPERA sede is a CIUDAD MODELO as it's understood in Honduras, which is largely negative. I think it's quite the contrary. It's an example of how governments should work, which is by clear and express consent of the governed. All right, that's not the way most governments work. You are just assumed to have a social contract that you're somehow bound to, even though it's nowhere really spelled out, and certainly you didn't sign on to it. I would say something further, which I would perhaps characterize as a number 4, although really is a derivative of the way in which the PRÓSPERA Council is set up, but it's its own thing. Within the PRÓSPERA sede, residents, aside from council action, have the ability to unilaterally veto any decision that the sede council comes up with. Okay? Automatically. It has to be a majority of the residents, but anything the council comes up with, and remember, the majority of the council is already elected by the residents, but we know that elected officials are not immune from corruption and are not immune from making bad decisions, even if they're not corrupt. So if the council makes a decision or imposes a law that the majority of the population doesn't like or doesn't want, it is the supreme, the sovereign, if you will, decision maker by virtue of having the power to veto any decision the council makes. You don't have that in the rest of Honduras. It's not easy for the rest of Honduras, in part because it's much larger and complex, for the residents to say, you know what, we don't like this criminal code that the national government just imposed. And you know this, Max, it's very controversial to a number of people in the community. All they're given is the consultation, and it's kind of like whether you like it or not, if the National Congress decides, then it is now henceforth imposed. And what is being controversial about the criminal code, of course, is that many people allege that Congress is kind of passing a law to protect itself through immunity from acts of corruption. Well, in the sede, that would likely not fly, because the residents would say, oh no, you're not going to pass an immunity rule that exempts you from best practices. So actually, the first 3 things are powerful enough. This 4th thing, I think, seals the deal beyond any questions, that within the sede framework that PRÓSPERA has created, this is by far world-class, and more pro-residents, more pro-human rights, more pro-representation of the people than anything else that's in Honduras, and I venture to say out in the world.